Everybody, I'm Joe. We're talking about Marvel Multiverse, and we're doing another character build. Here we go. So I have now used every single power set in at least one build. Some of them more than others. Some, like lightning actions, I've sworn off for a little while, but I've used all of them. I have also used, at least I thought, every power inside of the basic power set. It's filled with stuff that's just essential, such as flight, such as the sturdy powers or the evasion powers, and there's lots of good stuff in there, but I have not used all of it. No, in fact, there are a couple things I haven't touched. Some of them just because they haven't really seemed really necessary to a build, and some of them, like the one we're going to talk about today, just because they're so cool, I need to build a whole character around it. We're talking about the disguise power today. Disguise is truly awesome. You can take it right away at rank 1. It costs no focus. It has no prerequisites. You are able to just change your appearance to look like someone else. Now, for disguise to be really good, you need to bump your ego on the character for two reasons. The first is people trying to see through your disguise. The target number to see through the disguise power is your ego defense, which I really like that because it scales with rank and it scales with the more that you put into your ego powers. And so we want to bump ego on the character. And I'd like to point out that this is based on your ego defense. So something like the integrity power does not interact. We talk about the SAD, single attribute dependent powers, all the time when we're doing character builds. They allow us to shore up defenses. But I'd like to point out that the way I actually label them at the bottom is actually not accurate. And I've known it's not accurate the whole time. I do it just for simple reference. So for instance, the brawling power allows you to use your melee defense for agility attacks. It does not technically replace your agility defense. I put that into the little boxes so that you can see what kind of defenses you have against incoming attacks. But critically, when you take a SAD power to shore up a defense, it does not actually change your defense score. Therefore, any powers that actually reference your true defense score without actually just being an attack bypass the SAD powers, meaning that if you were a logic-based character and took disguise, and then you tried to shore that up with the integrity power, it wouldn't work. The target number is actually your ego defense, not what you use against incoming attacks. I want to make sure that that's clear to everybody. So if we want disguise to be really good, first we need a high ego defense score, which only happens by actually adding ego points. Secondly, there are the checks. If I am a disguise-based character, I'm going to be using it to infiltrate. Well, that means I'm going to be making checks in order to lie and sneak past people. These are going to be deception-style checks or persuasion-style checks or intimidation-style checks. All of those are based on your ego. So we're going to want to actually bump our ego on the character so that our offensive checks in order to infiltrate and lie go really, really well. And we're going to want to have it so that our defense score is high so that nobody can see through our disguise. But that just tells us how to build a character. In the end, being able to just shapeshift into anybody is an insanely fun playstyle, and that's what we're going to do today. Our goal today is to build a character that's not trying to do damage. I'm not even going to calculate damage. We want to become another person. And we can start doing that, at least visually, right away at rank 1 with disguise, which we're going to take. But I want to take this further. How much of a character can we build who truly becomes someone else in all ways, who blows past any check that they might need in order to pass themselves off as somebody, and being able to truly be that person in another scenario, no matter what is asked of them? In other words, can I build the perfect mimic? Well, that's what we're going to try to do today. And of course, I'm not that great at naming my characters. I've already given this one away. If you have a better name, I'd love to hear it in the comments. But for the moment, I'll be calling today's character the Mimic. I'm not really completely dedicated to the occupation, but I wanted to choose something that actually provided some useful traits. So we are going to take educator. This is done for mechanical reasons more than thematic reasons, unlike most of my builds. Educator means, of course, you work in education. You can do a whole bunch with that as a character backstory, but it does give us 3 traits that we really want: presence, font of information, and connections. Presence means that we know how to command attention. We have an edge on ego checks that involve getting people to pay attention to us or voluntarily do things for us. And of course, if we are disguising ourselves, we're going to really want that particular bonus, and that's going to be useful. Next, we have font of information. This is really important. We get an edge on logic checks having to do with knowledge. Very generic, very, very useful. But when we are infiltrating, we might need to do logic checks to see if we understand some aspect of the world that we've wandered into so that we can pass ourselves off as someone who belongs there. So this is essential for our actual infiltration. I really wanted this on this character, especially since I'm not going to be pushing logic very much at all on this character. So yeah, the educator occupation, giving us both of these, really beneficial. Lastly, we have connections for community, and this community is very vague in the description of the traits, meaning pick a community. It's assumed to be education in some form, and now we have connections inside of that world. And flavor that however you want, but I imagine it'll be useful in figuring out the disguise and information you'll need before infiltrating. The origin, I have no particular opinion, but let's take mythic. We are a creature of myth and legend. We might appear human, we might not. Flavor that however you want to. Typically, this character is suggested to be an outsider, an occupation. I don't think that works for our occupation, but you could certainly flavor that as aspects of the character. This character is going to need a lot of points in a lot of things, and because I'm not that worried about combat, I'm going to dump my agility. We have to dump a physical trait on this character. We can't dump ego because that's what everything's based on. And since I need to be able to do logic checks to survive inside of an infiltration environment, I can't dump logic. You could dump melee, you could dump agility. I'm going to dump agility, but honestly, that is not a relevant decision. You could dump melee and give this character some kind of a ranged weapon and be in really, really good shape. That also makes a ton of sense. So we're going to take no points in melee, a -3 in agility, 2 in resilience, 2 in vigilance, 4 in ego. We're going to try to add a bunch of ability points to this character, but this is our starting off point. This is going to give us defenses of 10 for melee, 7 for agility, 12 for resilience, 12 for vigilance, 14 for ego and logic, and that is with power. So yeah, this character is going to be a target and is not going to be able to shrug off or avoid physical damage almost at all, which is definitely the weakness of the character. Hey everybody, Joe from the future cutting in. I know that I said in last week's video, which was the one on negative point buy, that I would in the future talk about how I would build a character with and without negative point buy going forward, because people build characters in different ways. And of course I didn't mention that here, thus the reason that I'm cutting in. The reason's pretty simple. I recorded this video prior to that one. So now I want to cut in here and just mention how I might do that. The reason for the negative point buy is pretty simple. It is going to allow me to have really high ego checks, which are important for this character, and maxing out ego is something I want to do on the character. Well, if I want that and I want a reasonable amount of hit points, then a negative modifier somewhere is important, or at least that allows me to get to those ability points. But having a negative modifier in agility is punishing. Negative agility modifier means that there's lots of agility checks in the game, and we're going to be bad at them. Agility is a commonly attacked defense. It means that later in the character build, when I'm trying to add points, I'm trying to catch up with agility. At level 2 with this character, I'm going to be able to start copying the ability score of other characters, but I don't have that yet at rank 1, so I'm going to get hit with agility attacks really easily. And I took wisdom at this rank not brawling. And there are reasons why you might say, well, that's not a very wise choice. You should have taken brawling instead. And I think that those are all reasonable arguments. Of course, we took a negative modifier in agility in order to get more hit points and more vigilance and more ego. So if I were building this character without negative modifier, it'd be a 0 agility, 1 vigilance, 1 resilience, 3 ego. It's probably the way that I would do it. And then I would put a bunch of points in at the next rank to try to get my ego at least to a 5. And that would be the maximum amount at rank 2. At that point, I've maxed out ego and I just have to put 1 point in at every rank, and then I don't have a negative modifier. If you do this, you might feel that you don't need to take wisdom necessarily or brawling, and it might save you a power learned. There is actually some value in that. So anyway, that's the way that I would build this. It means a little bit less hit points, especially right away at rank 1, a little bit less vigilance, and this is a vigilance hungry character, but it means I'm going to be better at checks going forward. So anyway, that's the way I would modify it. So first we're going to take disguise, and we've already talked about it, and this means we can transform ourselves into anybody else. I have a player at my table who took this right away at rank 1 and is using it to some awesome effects for infiltration missions, for tricking the enemies, and it's really a fun playstyle. So we are building the character around disguise. As you saw, we are going to be taking the wisdom power. This is going to allow our ego defense to stand in place for logic attacks coming in. We're not bumping logic, at least not initially on this character, but at least we're going to have some defenses there. Next, we're going to take Discipline 1. We need the Discipline powers on this character, and the Discipline powers give us a bonus to our damage when we have an attack that uses ego, which we're not using. But more importantly for us, it gives us a bonus to any non-attack roll that uses ego. And that's going to be whenever we lie, and it's going to be for some other stuff we're going to use along the way. So this is going to be really useful for us. Now, I haven't actually gone into a power set yet, and we are going to go into the one power set that is going to guarantee that we are able to transform into somebody else. And that, of course, is going to be power control. Power control is an incredibly fun way to build a character. I have used it in order to create a really offensive-based character. Check out the Life Drinker from a little while back. I've used it to build what I think is the best support character in the game, which I called the Backbone from not too long ago. But now we're going to use it in order to mimic and become other people. And I'm going to take one offensive ability from it right now, so I have something to do in combat, though this character is not good at combat right away at rank 1. We'd be bad with ranged weapons, we'd be really bad with ranged weapons, we'd be bad with our fists, but at least we can dampen power. Dampen power is not going to be great, but it's going to be okay for us. We pick an enemy that is within 20 spaces and we make an ego attack against them. So the bonus from discipline does not apply. We choose one power and we dampen it. This means that if it has an area or duration, it is halved. The damage multiplier is reduced by 1, and it can no longer benefit from fantastic successes. So whatever the hardest hitting enemy is on the board, we take whatever their big attack is, and we just turn the volume down on it. It's a useful little bit of control, and it's nice to have something right away at rank 1. But you want to be in a campaign that is not all combat. It's going to have a lot of infiltration or investigation or other things, obviously. The trait we're going to take is Beguiling. Beguiling gives us an edge on any ego check that is made to persuade somebody who might be attracted to us. Remember, with Disguise Self, you can become anybody. And so I imagine that we can stack Beguiling and Presence pretty easily, and your narrator might even give you an additional edge just by becoming the right person in a situation. So at minimum, we have a double edge on most of our ego checks when we have transformed into somebody else, which is really fun. You might even get a third as well. At rank 2, we are going to bring Resilience to a 4, Vigilance to a 4, and Ego to a 5. We're going to have defenses of 10 for melee, 7 for agility. We're going to have 14 for Resilience and Vigilance, and 15 for Ego and Logic, but all of those numbers are going to become really fluid really fast. At this rank, we are going to start becoming other people in more ways than just physically. It's going to be really fun to get into, but we're going to start with Discipline 2, which is going to give us a +2 to any non-attack roll checks using Ego, which is really the reason we need this. We're going to pick up Copy Power. Copy Power allows us to pick one target within 10 spaces, pick any power they have, and just duplicate it, and we can use it as well. Now, we don't automatically get their bonuses, their particular abilities that they use to use the power, and so picking up things like a ranged weapon power is not going to be very good for us, but we are able to just copy it, which is great. If we needed to be able to physically do a power that an enemy that we are mimicking has, we can now do that, which is pretty great. This costs 5 points of focus, and we still have to pay focus as normal for using any power that we have copied. Next, we're going to take Copy Ability. We get to pick one ability score of any character that is within 10 spaces and simply copy it. So remember, you can concentrate on a number of powers that is equal to your rank. So if I know that I want to be able to take, I don't know, the smash or clobber powers, I could copy somebody's melee score, and then I could copy that power. And now I'd be just as good at smashing as any melee-based character. One thing that's important to mention here, we use the ability score we copy in place of our own for all purposes. So what happens if we copy Resilience or Vigilance? I have not found a specific ruling on that question, but what it looks like to me is if we were to replace our Resilience score with one that is higher, we would have more hit points. But if we were to lose concentration, we would take all of the damage that we had taken and apply it to our normal amount of health. And that could theoretically bring us below 0 health if we lose concentration. So it's something to watch out for. The same thing can also happen to your focus if you copy a vigilance score. But we can now copy anything that we want. So now the fact that we have pretty terrible melee and agility scores is kind of irrelevant depending on the team you have around you. Next, we're going to take Copy Trait. If there's a trait that we absolutely need for a build, we can just steal it. What's cool about Copy Trait is it costs no focus to do this. It just requires our concentration. So you can just pick up, perhaps if somebody has situational awareness, you can pick it up at the beginning of the day. After you roll initiative, you can then drop concentration on this to do something else, which would be a pretty fun way of using this particular power. Next, we're going to take Clone Moves. This is potentially incredible. We are going to pick another character within 10 spaces of us. It does not need to be an ally. We do not need to make a check. This automatically works. We are going to clone all of their powers that come from the special training origin. More on that in a second. We do have to pay focus equal to the highest focus cost of the powers that we have cloned, 5 focus being the minimum, and we do have to pay focus as normal if we use these powers. So special training is designed to describe a character that becomes proficient enough in combat to act as a superhero, even though they have no innate abilities. The power sets that are available for special trainings are martial arts, melee weapons, ranged weapons, shield bearer, and tactics. This is an enormous range of some really good powers. Specifically, just in martial arts, you would have Brace for Impact potentially, and Do This All Day. You would have from Shield Bearer, the shield powers, if there's somebody in your party who has those, which would automatically give you damage reduction. There's a lot of great stuff in here that you can just nab, and that's pretty great. But the trait we're going to take is Battle Ready. We are spending focus in order to grab powers and abilities and traits from people, and I want to make sure we don't run out. Also, if we use Clone Moves and we pick up a Brace for Impact or Do This All Day, I want the focus to spend in order to heal if necessary. So now You can clone a bunch of powers in order to be effective in combat if you need to be. But you're also able to find a target and simply pick up not just what they look like, but any of their powers, any of their ability scores, any of their traits. Anything about this character, you have the ability to grab. But now the biggest problem that we're going to deal with is your ability to use these powers. Let's do point buy at rank 3. We're going to bring resilience, vigilance, and ego all to 6s, and this is going to give us defenses of 10 for melee, 7 for agility, and 16s for everything else. I have some very specific plans for what I want to do with this character, but I need to shore up some stuff first. We're going to take discipline 3, so now we have a +3 to all of these ego checks that we're doing in order to make sure we can pass ourselves off as somebody else. Next, I'm going to take sturdy 1 and 2. This is going to give us a 2 damage reduction across the board, something we definitely need on a character that really hasn't had any defenses up until now. Next, we're going to take swipe powers. Now, this is going to be a little bit of a tricky one to use, but it's cool if you can pull it off. This does require being rank 3, which we are, having dampened power and copy powers, and we have those as well. This is an action or a reaction, but it is triggered when an enemy is grabbed, which of course, we're not good at by ourselves. However, if you copy somebody's melee ability score, and you copy perhaps the mighty powers, you'd be incredible at this. But if we were able to grab someone, we make an ego attack, which means we don't get the bonus from the discipline powers, but we make an ego attack against them. Upon a success, we remove one of their powers and take it for our own. This is a great offensive bit of control because now the enemy is going to lose whatever their hardest hitting ability is. We still have to pay focus for this power if we use it like normal. So yeah, there's some setup to this in making it work, and it won't always work out. But if you can get this off the board and moving, it's going to be really cool. And it's great to just steal the best stuff that an enemy has. I've pulled this off in game with villains, and it is terrifying when you're on the other end of something like swipe power. Next, we're going to take clone powers. Clone powers allows us to pick any character within 10 spaces and spend 15 points of focus or more, depending on the highest cost of the powers that we're talking about. And we're going to duplicate all of their powers, all of them, across the board, and use them as if they had always been ours. This is pretty remarkable. And please remember, you can do this to multiple characters in subsequent turns, meaning you can grab all of the powers of literally up to 4 characters on the board, making you essentially godlike, even though this costs minimum 60 points of focus and 4 rounds of combat. So I wouldn't do this in combat, but it's pretty insane. There's only one caveat. The caveat, of course, is that clone powers requires us to be rank 4 in order to take, so our trait needs to be surprising power. As I've said many times, surprising power allows us to bypass the rank requirement of a power, but not other prerequisites. For clone powers, we need copy power, which we already have. So if we take surprising power as our trait, we can pick this up right now at rank 3. We're going to do point buy for rank 4, and it's going to look bizarre to you. And it's going to look bizarre because it's not going to add up, but this is going to give you an idea of where I'm going with the rest of this character build. We are going to bring melee to a 4, resilience, vigilance, and ego to 7s. And yes, that does add up to more than 5 points. At this point in the build, I can start to talk about why I dumped agility as opposed to melee. I want to get good at grabbing somebody in order to steal or swipe powers from them, and I don't want to have to rely on picking up that ability from somebody else earlier. So I dumped agility, so it'd be easier to ramp up my melee abilities here. So we're only taking 3 powers at this rank. The first one is Discipline 4. Discipline 4, of course, gives us a 4 for any of these wonderful ego checks that we've been doing this whole time. Next, we're going to take Sturdy 3. Sturdy 3 is going to give us a 3 damage reduction for all incoming physical damage, which of course we love. Next, we're going to take Shut Down Powers. This is truly one of those monstrous abilities in the game, but we pick an enemy that is within 20 spaces. We do not have to grab them first, and we make an ego attack against them. Upon a success, we remove all of their powers. All of them. We have to pay, when we do this, the cost of the most expensive power that they have, or 15 points of focus, whichever one is higher. Of course, the only difficulty is that these are ego attacks, not checks. So you do not get the bonus from the discipline powers. I have those really for the non-combat checks that we're doing in order to infiltrate, lie, and persuade. Now, what about our other two powers? We're not going to take them. We're going to take 2 ability points instead. That's what got our melee up to a 4. And you may have forgotten that you can do this, but you can forego taking a power and add +1 to any ability that you want. At this point in the game, this character build is pretty much complete, meaning that we can steal any powers that we want. We can steal any ability points that we want. We can steal any traits that we want. I don't need to take more powers, but I do need to be better at using them. And that means what I'm going to start doing is dumping taking powers, and instead I am going to make sure that I ramp up all of my stats that I use to utilize those powers. The trait that we are going to take is interrogation, which gives us an edge on ego or logic checks that are made when asking questions. So this is yet another way that we are going to stack edges when we are in our disguise. Let's go ahead and do point bite rank 5, which is going to be monstrous. We are taking at rank 5, 0 powers. So we're going to add 10 ability points. We're going to bring melee to an 8, resilience to an 8, vigilance to an 8, ego to an 8, and logic to a 3. This is going to give us defenses of 18 for melee, 7 for agility, unless we copy the brawling power, 18 for resilience, vigilance, and ego, and then an 18 for logic because we do have the wisdom power. The trait we're going to take is Quick Learner. If we fail an action check, we get an edge when doing that same action on our next turn. This is going to help us yet again when we are infiltrating. We're doing the exact same thing at rank 6. We are going to bring melee to a 9, agility to a 3. It's finally not negative. Resilience to a 9, vigilance to a 9, ego to a 9, and logic to a 3. So now we have defenses of 19 for everything except for agility and a 13 for agility. But of course, we could totally change that just by copying somebody else's agility ability score. We're picking up, yet again, no powers at rank 6 whatsoever. That's how we got our ability scores so high. This is pretty much the highest ability scores I have ever had on a character, and it's just incredibly fun to see that. But we are going to take a trait, and it's going to be public speaking. Public speaking means we are great at dealing with a crowd. We have an edge on all ego checks that have to do with speaking to or persuading groups. And all of these edges on ego checks theoretically can stack, giving us a monstrous ability score, a monstrous bonus from discipline, and monstrous number of edges from all of the traits we have taken. You are now the perfect infiltrator with your disguise power. I think this character would just be a blast to play. Your defenses in early game are pretty bad. I think that would be very difficult to get through. But you would be able to be amazing on the battlefield by mid-game where you're stealing and dampening powers from your enemies. You're able to grab all these powers and simply become somebody else in all ways. You're going to have fun in all of your infiltration abilities. And there's no limit to the powers you can actually have because you are copying those as early as rank 2. So I can't even say what kind of powers you're going to grab, what other kind of abilities you're going to be able to utilize, because that entirely depends on the allies and the enemies who are near you. This character will never get old to play. You will always be doing something new with this character, and that's fun. So yeah, this character can infiltrate into any building, become anybody, and actually be a more convincing version of that somebody than the original person themselves. And boy, oh boy, would I have a blast playing this character.